This war was never meant to happen. It was a conflict that Rome itself did not want. Yet Roman legions crossed the border, burning towns, driven by a thirst for glory that ignored the commands of Sulla himself. The secret catalyst was not a strategy, but a lie, whispered by one resentful defector seeking to save his own life. This is the story of how that single lie, fueled by ambition, shattered a truce and doomed Anatolia. The land that promise referred to, Anatolia, was not a place of peace in the early 1st century BC. It was a genuine powder keg. This sprawling peninsula, a bridge between the Hellenistic East and the burgeoning West, was a fractured landscape of competing interests. The expanding Roman Republic, having secured its dominance over the Mediterranean, now had its gaze fixed firmly on the East, hungry for the legendary wealth of Asia Minor. Rome's presence was a shadow stretching across the land, a promise of order to some and a threat of assimilation to others. Opposing this advance was the dominant regional power, the Kingdom of Pontus. From its heartland on the southern shores of the Black Sea, which it controlled utterly, Pontus looked south. Its king, Mithridates VI, was a man of vast ambition, poison-proof body, and profound intellect, who envisioned a grand Eastern empire under his rule. His immediate objective was clear and absolute: to seize control of all of Anatolia. This ambitious goal, however, was fraught with peril. It was not merely a matter of marching his army south. To achieve this, Mithridates would have to confront and subdue the lesser kingdoms that stood in his path. Buffer states like Cappadocia, Armenia, and Bithynia, each with its own complex allegiances and ancient rivalries. But these were merely the opening acts. The true challenge, the final boss of this geopolitical contest, was the powerful Roman Republic, which possessed the exact same expansionist ambitions. A clash was not just possible, it was inevitable. In fact, one major conflict had already taken place between these two titans. This brutal struggle, which history would come to know as the First Mithridatic War, had already bled the region white. Rome had, in the end, claimed victory, but it was a victory that came at a staggering cost. The price of holding the East had been paid in the currency of Rome's finest political and military blood. Among the staggering human losses were men of great power and prestige: Manius Aquilius, Lucio Valerio Flacco, and Caio Flavio Fimbria. These were not mere soldiers, they were consular figures, the very instruments of Roman foreign policy, and their loss sent shockwaves back to the Senate. Of course, the defeat had been anything but cheap for Mithridates either. The king of Pontus had seen his grand army shattered, losing more than 150,000 men in a series of disastrous battles. Worse still, he had lost territory, with more than half of his hard-won possessions in Anatolia stripped from him and returned to Roman allies. This first bloody chapter between the two powers culminated in the Peace of Dardanus. Yet those who signed the treaty knew the truth. This was not a normal peace, crafted from a place of resolution and mutual understanding. It was at best a truce, a temporary cessation of hostilities born of mutual exhaustion. It was a moment for both giants to catch their breath before the inevitable second round. The Romans, ever pragmatic, immediately exploited this ceasefire to address their own pressing issues. The Republic was sick with internal strife, a sickness that would soon consume it in civil war. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, the Roman general who had actively and decisively campaigned against Mithridates, packed his standards and turned his legions back toward Italy. His fight was not over. He returned to confront the political intrigues and rival factions that threatened his power in Rome itself. But Sulla did not leave the east undefended. Before departing, he placed Roman interests in the region under the command of Lucio Licinio Lucullus. Lucullus, a capable and intelligent commander, understood the fragile nature of the peace. He knew Mithridates was not a man to accept defeat lightly. And so, without wasting a single day, Lucullus began preparations for another imminent conflict with the Pontic king. His first move was to secure his military force. He entrusted all the veteran soldiers, the hardened legions who had survived the First War, to the command of Murena. Murena was an experienced commander, battle-tested and, crucially, loyal to Sulla's political faction. This Roman commander, now bristling with the power of two veteran legions, did not adopt a defensive posture. He embraced a passive-aggressive tactic against Mithridates. He was not content to simply watch. He intended to provoke. As soon as he received his new command, Murena marched his forces to the southern border of Pontus and established a threatening presence, a Roman dagger pointed at the king's heartland. Meanwhile, from his capital, Mithridates watched the political agitation in Rome with great preoccupation. He understood Roman politics better than most foreign kings. He knew that Sulla's power, while great, was not absolute. If Lucius Cornelius Sulla were to lose his grip, if his faction were to fall in the brutal game of Roman politics, the truce of Dardanus would be broken ipso facto. The treaty held only as long as its architect held power. This is not to say that the Basileus, the king, did not want another war with Rome. He absolutely did. His ambition had not been quenched by defeat, it had only been refined. But he was a realist. He was simply not ready yet. He needed time. The fragile truce provided him with that precious, necessary time. Anatolia was a complex board with more than two players. The other man of power in the immediate vicinity was Ariobarzanes of Cappadocia. Cappadocia, a kingdom bordering Pontus, was weak. Ariobarzanes was still grappling with intense power struggles for his own throne, desperately trying to defend his delicate position from both internal rivals and external predators. Mithridates, ever the opportunist, recognized this weakness. His expansionist desires, though temporarily checked by Rome, were still simmering. He knew Ariobarzanes was vulnerable, and so, testing the waters of his new truce, he did not hesitate to launch a limited military campaign in the northern part of the Cappadocian kingdom. It was a probe, a way to gain territory and test Roman resolve simultaneously. The Pontic king was haunted by the memory of the First War. He had lost over 150,000 men, a catastrophic figure that spoke to a fundamental flaw in his military doctrine. This time, he wanted to ensure he did not make the same mistake. He began a radical restructuring of his army. He had observed the Romans in battle and realized that the classic Hellenistic phalanx, the pike wall that had dominated battlefields for centuries, was becoming obsolete, was too slow, too inflexible to cope with the fluid, maniple-based Roman legions. Consequently, Mithridates began to recruit massively for different types of units. He sought mobility and firepower, namely vast wings of archers and, most importantly, a heavy, devastating cavalry force. But while the king reformed his army, he was simultaneously forced to manage a series of venomous internal problems. The court of Pontus was a nest of intrigue, and Mithridates, whose own life story was built on surviving plots, saw enemies everywhere. His paranoia became a torment, a poison he drank daily. drove him to suspect everyone, even his own family. This suspicion culminated in a brutal act. He was compelled to manage the retirement of one of his own two sons, having come to suspect the young man's loyalty. The loyalty of those closest to him would indeed become his curse. Or, this paranoia was not without cause, but it would soon create a self-fulfilling prophecy. During the First War against Rome, his chief general, Archelaus, had been the one responsible for the military disaster that left more than 100,000 casualties on the Pontic side. It was a failure of such magnitude that Mithridates could neither forget nor forgive. For this reason, the Basileus had stripped Archelaus of his command. The truth was simple. The king no longer trusted the general, neither his loyalty nor his capabilities. Archelaus, in turn, found himself in a terrifying position. He was a man of great pride, and he was now sidelined, humiliated. Worse than that, he was resentful. His resentment grew as he began to hear the whispers in the court, the insidious rumors that his time was counted, that the king's paranoia would soon settle on him as the final scapegoat for the lost war. Archelaus decided he had to do something about it. Instead of waiting for his inevitable destitution, or perhaps a summons for a cup of poison, Archelaus made a fateful choice. He defected.
Quis es et curvenisti?
He fled Pontus and passed over to the Roman side, offering his services to the very men he had once fought. Once under the command of Lucio Licinio Murena, Archelaus knew he had to prove his worth. He needed to make himself indispensable to give his new masters a reason to protect him. And so he began to feed Murena information that was purposefully and grossly exaggerated. He alleged that his former king, Mithridates, was not merely rebuilding. He claimed the Pontic king was planning an imminent, massive attack with his new army, that the truce was a sham, and that Rome was in immediate danger. This was the spark that landed on the powder. Murena, like any ambitious Roman of his era, possessed a deep and abiding thirst for glory and laurels. Peace did not win a man a triumph. He listened to Archelaus's rumors and chose to act upon them as if they were fact. He decided to ignore the existing truce completely. With Archelaus's intelligence as his justification, Murena led his legions across the border and attacked the southern domains of Pontus. He sacked everything in his path, rampaging through the provinces. The campaign was a stunning success in one regard. He secured an immense amount of booty. Pontus was, after all, one of the richest kingdoms of the era, and Murena's legions grew heavy with looted gold and slaves. News of the sacking quickly reached Mithridates. The king was utterly dumbfounded. The Roman aggressiveness left him dislocated, confused, given that the truce was still officially in effect. This was not a border skirmish. This was a full-scale invasion by 2 Roman legions. Unsure if this was a rogue action or a formal declaration of war from Sulla, Mithridates sent a small expedition of cavalry to investigate what had happened. Of that expedition, only a fraction of the riders returned. They brought chilling reports. They had found Murena's legions. The Romans had ambushed their unit, and the Pontic cavalry was overwhelmed, with the Romans cutting down the rest of their comrades. The Greek Basileus was now both enraged and profoundly shocked. This was a flagrant, undeniable breach of the treaty. Wasur, he immediately dispatched an emissary to Murena, informing the Roman commander that this action was shattering the agreement with Rome and demanding his immediate withdrawal. Following this tense confrontation, new negotiations for a truce took place. Una Murena, perhaps realizing he had overplayed his hand and lacking official sanction from Sulla, agreed to halt his campaign. This new, even more fragile truce gave Mithridates exactly what he craved: more time. He now knew that war was not a question of if, but when. The Roman aggression had lit a fire under him. The winter passed in a state of high tension. The snows in the Anatolian highlands were deep, forcing a pause on all major military movements. Then after a few months, the snows began to melt. In Murena, his thirst for glory unquenched and his legions restless, returned to the hunt. He once again crossed the border, but this time his campaign was one of pure, unadulterated destruction. He sacked dozens, perhaps hundreds of Pontic towns and villages. His rampage was so thorough that he converted the entire south of the kingdom into an absolutely catastrophic zone, a wasteland of burned farms and empty towns. The Roman legions marched where they pleased, and the Pontic border forces could do nothing to stop them. Then an incredible thing happened. Mithridates decided not to intervene. As reports of the devastation piled up in his capital, the king held his armies back. This was not weakness, it was a supreme act of strategic patience. Wadhuri, he was not yet ready, and he would not be goaded into a premature fight on Murena's terms. Nakuni, Murena, having spread chaos and finding no army to oppose him, eventually withdrew his legions to the west, his men laden with even more plunder. The Roman commander had now attacked and pillaged a friendly kingdom twice, in direct violation of a treaty. News of this eventually reached Lucius Cornelius Sulla in Italy. Sulla, who was attempting to stabilize his own precarious political situation, was aware of everything happening in Anatolia. He understood that Murena's private war could destabilize the entire East and undo all the work of the First Mithridatic War. He sent warnings to Murena, ordering him to stand down and respect the treaty. Despite these explicit warnings from Sulla, Murena decided to attack one more time. In this aspect, history is unclear. It is unknown if he did it despite Sulla, openly defying his commander-in-chief, or if Sulla, through some back channel, secretly gave him permission, testing Mithridates' limits. The sources are silent on this crucial point. But be that as it may, Murena attacked the kingdom of Pontus again. This time, however, his objective was not to sack minor villages. He had a strategic target. His legions advanced toward the great port city of Sinop, one of the jewels of the Pontic kingdom. And this was the breaking point. An attack on a few border towns was a raid. A march on a major city like Sinop was an act of total war. At this point, the Pontic Basileus considered that the total war against Rome had begun. In truth, this was not a war with Rome, it was a war with Murena. But for Mithridates, that was a distinction without a difference. The legions on his soil wore Roman eagles. In any case, Mithridates was finally ready to confront the Republic. His reforms were complete. His new army was trained. Without losing a moment, the king gathered his new host, his archers, and his heavy cavalry, with the singular mission of expelling the Roman invader. He dispatched Gordius of Cappadocia, his most trusted commander, to intercept the Romans. The Pontic vanguard under Gordius's command moved swiftly. They located the two Roman legions under Murena. The two armies found each other on opposite banks of a wide, fast-moving river, the Halis. Upon sighting the enemy, both Gordius and the Murena adopted a defensive position, with the river separating them. The impasse began. It seemed that neither commander wanted to take the initiative, neither wanting to risk a difficult amphibious assault against a prepared enemy. Audicuna Murena's veterans were confident. They had rampaged through Pontus for months with impunity. But at a given moment, a great cloud of dust was seen on the Pontic side of the river. With these fresh reinforcements, the Pontics now possessed a significant numerical superiority over the Romans. Murena, watching from the far bank, must have felt his confidence curdle into dread. The army he had been chasing had now turned to face him, and it was enormous. Cachua and Mithridates, wasting no time, took advantage of this newfound superiority. He gave the order, cross the river and advance against Murena. Arena, what followed was not a cautious probe. It was an enormous, thunderous charge of cavalry. The new Pontic heavy cavalry, the king's prized creation, plunged into the river and surged up the opposite bank. This massive charge completely swept away the unsuspecting Romans. They had been prepared for an infantry battle, not a mounted avalanche. The cavalry charge hit their flanks and tore through their screening units, throwing the legions into chaos. Following the cavalry, the main bodies of both infantries clashed. The shock of forces was incredibly fierce. Sonur, the Romans, who were mostly veteran legionaries from the First War, offered a truly heroic resistance. Ectin, they were professionals, the best soldiers in the world. They formed defensive squares, their shields interlocking, their short swords finding their mark against the Pontic infantry. Because of this Roman bravery and their steadfast refusal to surrender, the battle lasted for several hours. The banks of the Halis became a killing field, a grinder of men. Nevertheless, despite their courage, the Romans had no chance. They were very, very outnumbered, and they were fighting an enemy they had fundamentally underestimated. They had believed they were fighting the same obsolete army from the First War. They were wrong. They were able, through sheer discipline, to offer a hard fight against the Pontic cavalry, reforming their lines again and again. But they were finally and decisively overcome. Their lines broke. The heroic resistance dissolved into a panicked rout. Puna, the Pontic cavalry, now in its element, showed no mercy. Ahi, they pursued the fleeing legionaries and cut down hundreds of Romans as they tried to escape. The ground was littered with the remnants of the legions. Amidst the chaos, Murena and his high command were able to break free. Somarin, they abandoned their men, their standards, and their dignity, and escaped into the safety of the nearby mountains, hunted like animals. At this point, King Mithridates had achieved what he had dreamed of for years. He had won a great, unambiguous, and crushing victory against a Roman army. He had annihilated the enemy that had been harassing his kingdom for so long. Mithridates had not just defeated Murena, he had validated his new military doctrine. The phalanx was dead. The new combined arms force of cavalry and archers was ascendant. The king's prestige, which had been tarnished by the First War, was restored in a single bloody afternoon. He stood on the battlefield, surrounded by his victorious soldiers, and looked upon the captured Roman eagles, the ultimate symbol of his triumph. Hatunman the Basileus, however, was not a man to rest on his laurels. His ambition, which had been simmering, now boiled over. He had an army in the field, fresh from a major victory, and an enemy in disarray. Immediately following this victory against the Romans, the Pontic king pivoted. He directed his army to attack the north of Cappadocia once again. His rival, Ariobarzanes, was weak, and now his Roman protectors had been scattered. Mithridates intended to reclaim all the territory he had lost and more. Hectunum, the entire geopolitical balance of Anatolia, which Sulla had carefully constructed, was collapsing. News of the disaster traveled fast. It reached Rome, where Sulla was still engaged in his delicate political maneuvering. The report of Murena's total defeat, the loss of 2 veteran legions, and Mithridates' subsequent invasion of Cappadocia was a catastrophe. Sulla, upon seeing that the situation in Anatolia was getting completely out of hand, acted with decisive speed.